Well, good morning. Good morning. Today, we are continuing our series called Lost Privileges, and we are talking about pride, humility, and revenge, and how all of those things work together. Now, I got to ask you a question as we get rolling today. How many of you heard of Tiger Woods? Right? Hopefully, yeah, pretty much everybody's heard of Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is an incredible golfer, and he has a really strange and sometimes discouraging kind of story. If you paid any attention at all, you probably know that there was a time he was the best golfer in the world. But in 2009, everything changed. Everything changed for Tiger Woods. It was discovered that he had multiple affairs. His marriage blew up. He had a DUI and a car accident, and it looked like everything was over, really, to be honest with you, because his life just kind of blew up. And some people felt like, hey, he's going to come back. Eventually, sooner or later, he'll work through all this stuff, and he will come back. But the reality is, since 2009, he's had several surgeries, he's had several injuries, he's had another DUI, he's had a couple of wins on the tournament. But the reality is, really his career was pretty much over in 2009. Now, he may pull out a win here or there or do something spectacular again because he has so much talent. But what changed for Tiger is what changed for a lot of us. Even though we don't have world-class talent, even though we're not at the top of our field. See, Tiger got to a point where his ego told him, the rules don't apply to me. I don't have to live like everybody else. Because I'm so talented, because I have so much wealth, because I have so much influence, it's not on me to follow the rules, to live like everyone else. His pride got out of control, and it helped him slide into a life he didn't want. And for so many of us, we face that same challenge. Even though we don't have world-class wealth, we don't have talent that everybody else looks at. We're not famous on Instagram influencing the whole country at one time. But we still fight with pride. It impacts all of us. Sometimes pride impacts us at a cultural level, at a societal level. And I'll give you an example. And the only reason I know this, if you're in your 20s or 30s right now, is because when I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought the same thing. It is so easy to look at other generations and think, they don't get it. Right? I mean, I bless them, my parents, my grandparents, whatever, but they just don't get it. I mean, they're not nearly as, sophisticated as we are. And they're kind of naive, they trusted in institutions, and it's almost like they wanted to be fooled by things, and they believed in stuff, and they were super patriotic, or they were super convinced of this or that or whatever, and of course, those things aren't true, and they just don't get it. I mean, it would be impossible for somebody as smart as you to be manipulated by the media or powerful people into hating and being fearful and being divided, right? I mean, we're so much more smart than that. We're so much smarter than that. We're so much more sophisticated than that. You see how easy it is for pride to sneak in and begin to change the way we think. We look at others and think that they're not where we are, and because they're not where we are, we can make different choices than they do because we figured out some things that they haven't figured out. But that's kind of that big global level. What about your level? What about your life? And here's what I know about you. And before I say anything, the reason I know it about you is because I know it about me, all right? So this is a we thing, not a you thing. This is a we thing. Do you know that every dumb decision I ever made, I was right there with me? Right? I really was. Just like you, and I'm not calling you dumb, but just like every dumb decision you ever made, you were right there with you. Right there at the same time. You were right there. Every word that you said, that as soon as you said it, you thought, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. You were right there with you, right? I mean, every judgmental or snarky thought that you had that you didn't express, you were right there with you. And you know what's underneath all of that? It's pride. Underneath all of that stuff that we don't want to be that way. We don't want to deal with that stuff. We don't want to have to walk in those places. But pride slides us into places we don't want to be. It makes us into someone we don't want to hang out with. And it puts us in circumstances and situations where we have to then recover from what happened because our pride got out of control. And pride it's just slippery. It's sneaky. We think we're doing well, and as soon as we start patting ourselves on the back, look how much I've grown. Really, what I mean? It's like I'm so much more humble than I used to be. And you're like, no. It doesn't work like that. And pride, it's incessant, right? It's just always there. It's just always kind of picking at us. I mean, it squeals when we start to lose influence. It kind of stamps its foot if we don't get to share our opinion. And if our rights are threatened, it just flares up in anger that I must and I have, and don't you know who I am and what I have and what I should have and what I'm entitled to. Pride is really hard to live with because, like I said, one, it's relentless, and two, it's incredibly sneaky. It shows up in places we don't expect it to show up, in ways we never thought. And so often, by the time we realized it's happened, it feels like it's too late. It feels like we're Tiger Woods and we've crashed the car and we've ruined our marriage and we're in trouble and it's like all the things we had are gone. How do we recover? And we didn't even know we were caught in it. But there's some good news. There is some good news. Because there is I don't want to call it an antidote, but there is an answer to pride. There is something you can do to keep pride in check. And the good news is God is going to help you do this if you're willing. That you have an opportunity here. There is a tool that you can use that can literally help you avoid all the things that pride would slide you into. And it's this: raising my eyes changes my life. Raising my eyes changes my life. And you're like, what is that? You're going to have to explain that. I'm glad you asked that, because we're going to explain that in the next few minutes. If you've got a Bible, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 4. In Daniel chapter 4, there's a story about a man named Nebuchadnezzar. And if you've been with us, you've heard of him already. We've talked about him for a couple of different weeks. This guy ruled a vast empire. And we're somewhere in the neighborhood of about 585 BC when what we're going to read about takes place. He ruled an empire kind of like Xi Jinping, the ruler of China, or Vladimir Putin leads Russia. I mean, he was the dictator. He had control of everything. The land, the military, the economy. I mean, everything was at his beck and call, whatever he wanted to do. And he learned a lesson about pride. Because it would be easy to understand why somebody that had that much control, that much power, that much influence, of course, they're going to be more tempted to be prideful. But the reality is, all of us are tempted to be prideful. And so in Daniel chapter 4, verse 1 through 3, we kind of start this story. And I want you to listen, because Nebuchadnezzar is going to confess something here. Chapter 4, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and people of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Now, you read that and you think, well, that doesn't sound very prideful. Here's why. This is after the fact, okay? This is a guy who kind of learned something, and he's looking back. Like so many of us, he learned it the hard way, right? He was living his life, he was doing his thing, and him doing his thing got him in trouble. And then something happened. And because of what happened, he's now an older, wiser man looking back, and he's saying, I get it now. I understand. The thing I missed, and as you're going to find out, this is a multi-year process. This wasn't like he just, woke up, something happened, and everything changed. This was over the course of several years. He looks back and he realizes, okay, life is not what I thought it was. Life is not about me like I tried to make it. Life is not about me getting what I want, the way I want, when I want it. It's about something else. But he had to go through it to learn that. Now, he had a dream. And again, if you've been with us, dreams seem to play an important role at this time in the world. And they were seen as ways that God spoke to people. And so he has this dream. And if you want to skip down to verse 10, he begins to share what this dream was like. What kind of kicked off this whole 7 to 10 year episode of Nebuchadnezzar's life. Verse 10, and we're going to stay with me because this is a little bit of a longer passage. But verse 10, it says this. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches, and from it, every creature was fed. So kind of just picture this. He just dreams of this massive tree in a field, and this tree is taking care of everything. It's taking care of the birds, the animals, the people, everything. This tree is providing shade and food, and this tree is the thing, okay? So that's kind of where his dream is. And then look at verse 13. In the visions I saw while lying in the bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree, trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots be bound with iron and bronze and remain in the ground in the grass of the field. So in essence, cut down the tree and bind the stump, all right? Next section. Let him, it's talking about the person that was represented by the tree. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal until 7 times pass by for him. The decision is announced by messengers. The Holy One declares the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets them over the lowliest of people. And that was his dream. And you can understand why he might be a little confused. Like, okay, I get it. I had this dream. It seems like it's important. I'm not quite sure what it means. So he goes to Daniel. And he asks Daniel, because Daniel has a history here. Daniel has been a wise advisor. He's been a counselor. And more than that, he's been right. Every time the king has come to Daniel, Daniel has given him good, wise counsel, good advice, even told him what things mean, and it worked out exactly like he said. So he goes, I'm going to go back to Daniel. And he tells him the dream. He says, Daniel, what do you think this means? And Daniel kind of, almost like it's obvious. He's like, well, king, you're the tree. You're the tree, right? I mean, you're the ruler. You're the dictator. You're in charge of everything. You are the tree. But God has said he's going to cut you down. And he's not only that, he said you're going to become like an animal, and you're going to wander, and you're going to live like a beast. And he is going to take this away from you. And so, king, please, stop. Change direction. Maybe God will hold off. Maybe the reason he gave you this dream is as a warning that you don't have to end up here. But Nebuchadnezzar, he didn't listen. Look at verse 28. Skip down to verse 28. He says this, all of that in the dream happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? And even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like an ox, and 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Now, stop there for a second. You might hear this, and especially if you're not familiar with the Bible or you didn't grow up in church, and you might kind of even be tempted to think to yourself, you see, this is why I'm not so sold on the Bible. I mean, it says the guy's going to become like a cow and he's going to get removed. He's going to go live out in the woods like he's homeless. I mean, that doesn't happen to people that are emperors and kings. I mean, he might get killed. There might be a rebellion, but that kind of stuff, it makes me skeptical. And I completely understand that. But I want to give you a couple other things to think about because you might not know this. Did you know there is a real mental illness? It's called boanthropy. And it is exactly what is described here. It is when someone begins to take on the characteristics of a cow and live like a cow. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of made up. But I looked it up. It's in medical journals. This is a real thing. Now, it doesn't happen to everybody, obviously, but it does happen. One other thing that to me is just fascinating. There's a lot of records outside the Bible about the kingdom of Babylon, about their rulers, about their laws, about their culture, the things they did. What's really kind of curious is, from 582 BC till 575 BC, it's quiet. There's no records. It's almost as if things didn't happen or there was no king or something changed in their world and in their culture that they didn't keep any records for those 7 years. Which when you read this in the Bible, you might tend to think he's going to become like a cow and he's going to go away for 7 years. I mean, come on, that sounds goofy. Unless that's exactly what really happened. And that's why it's in Daniel. Because it does sound odd. And it was done for a very specific reason. To get Nebuchadnezzar's attention. You see, Nebuchadnezzar, and let's talk about him for a minute before we talk about us, right? Nebuchadnezzar had succumbed to pride. He said, all this stuff, it's because of me. All the things that I have, it's because I earned them. All the things that I've accomplished is because, frankly, I'm that good. And you might think, well, I would never say that. I would never think that. And God is showing us something. It's in pride that we rebel against him. You see, we were created, you and I, we were created to have dominion over the earth. We are created to rule over the earth. Now, it's supposed to be compassionate and loving leadership, but we were created for that. But every time Every time we step outside of God's design, I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It's because of pride. It's because ultimately, down at the bottom, we feel like, I know better. I know better than God on this one. When it comes to my sexuality and my sex life, I know what God says, but I know better. I know better. I really do. When it comes to my money, I know what God says. I know what he wants me to do. I know he expects me to trust him. But the truth is, I know better. I really do. Underneath all of it, there's a little bit of a pride that says, I don't quite trust his love, and I am pretty sure that I know better than God on this one. When it comes to relationships and how we treat people, especially people that are not friendly to us, there's all the emotions that go along with it. But again, underneath all of that, there's an ugly little pride that says, I know better. I know what God says. I know what he expects. I know what love looks like even, but I know better. And Nebuchadnezzar puts this on full display. And God shows us something in his life that applies to our life. Every time we feel like we know better, every time we don't trust God's love, it hurts us. It dings our mental health. And it literally, in Nebuchadnezzar's case, and in so many ways, I'm going to try to show you in just a second, in our case, it talks us into things we would never do otherwise, to, in essence, become insane. Things we know better than that we do. Things we would never want, but yet at the same time, we're asking for them. It drives us. It leads us to a place we don't want to be. So there's a couple warning signs, right? There's a couple things about pride that maybe are you're driving your car and your check engine light comes on and hopefully it doesn't just shut down, but it's telling you need to do something quickly. There's a couple of those kind of dashboard indicator lights when it comes to pride in my life and in your life. And the first one is when you notice somebody else's pride and it bothers you. Their arrogance bothers me. Like there's another person in my life, maybe it's a family member or a friend or a coworker or something. Their arrogance bothers me. Now, I'm not going to say every time you notice that somebody is arrogant, that means you're being prideful, but I will say it's a warning light. Because if their pride really bothers me, what's going on inside is this. They're getting the attention that I want. They're getting the notoriety and recognition that I want. And because they're so arrogant, it really bothers me because ultimately they're getting what I feel like I deserve, what my pride is competing for. And the reason it bothers me so much that they are arrogant is because I want what they have. That's one indicator. And maybe that one doesn't apply to you, but here's one that applies to everybody. Ingratitude. Ingratitude. When I hear myself saying, well, I've worked hard and I deserve. Well, I'm kind of entitled to, because I've given up and I've sacrificed and I should have. Every time we bring it back to what we have done and what we deserve and what we have, in essence, what we're doing is we're choosing ingratitude. I don't recognize that anyone, God or anyone else, has had any part in giving me, creating for me, helping me, blessing me, giving me the ability to accomplish things. I'm not grateful. I'm instead entitled. And that is a massive warning sign that tells us our pride is getting ready to slide us into a place we don't want to be. It is getting ready to take us into a place we don't want to be, to become a person we don't want to be like, to live a life that we don't want to live. And so these are some of the warning signs when it comes to pride. And it happens on an individual level, but like I said earlier, it happens on a group level too. It happens as a society. And any time we as an individual, or we as a group, or we as a large group, move away, there's a cost. There's a cost to pay for moving away from God's way, right? There is a cost to pay. If I decide that I know better, if we decide that we know better, there is a cost to pay for moving away from God's way. We are not above it. We are not allowed to disregard what God has said. And it is pride that tells us that we can and that we should and that it'll be fine because we know better. Now, I want to give you an example. And I know this is dangerous, okay? I get it. This is controversial. And what I really need you to do before I share this with you is take off all your political stuff. Just put all your political stuff aside for a second. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, liberal, conservative, whatever, it doesn't matter. Put all that aside for just a moment. Just put that out of your head. I want to give you an example of where it's so easy for us as a group, because our pride gets out of control, to be insane. If you've been paying any attention at all, you know there's a huge commotion going on about the law in our country regarding abortion. And I understand that, and I understand there's people that are voting, there's representatives, there's courts, there's presidents, there's all governors, all that kind of stuff. I get that. But what I want to ask you to do is take a bigger, broader look for just a second. Put aside, again, the political and all the legal stuff. When you look at this singular issue, what are we talking about? Throughout human history, children have been seen as a gift from God. Pregnant mothers have been seen as someone to honor, to bless, to protect. And we are arguing about the right to kill that child. See, that's insanity. And again, I'm not trying to take a political position. I'm not doing any of those things. I'm using this as an example to say, listen, as a society, are we really arguing about this? See, that's what happens when pride gets out of control. It literally makes you insane. It takes you to places you don't want to be. It turns you into a person you don't want to be. It puts you into circumstances that you don't want to have to recover from. But that's what pride does. That's why it is so dangerous. It is relentless, and it is incredibly sneaky. But there's another side of this. I told you we're going to talk about pride, humility, and revenge. There's another side of this. And Daniel has a part to play in this whole episode of Nebuchadnezzar's life. And he absolutely shows us what humility looks like. Look at verse 19. As Daniel was interpreting the dream, he says this, "Then Daniel, who was also called Belshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. And so the king said, 'Belshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you.' And Belshazzar answered, 'My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries.'" When the king asked him what the dream meant, Daniel knew exactly what it meant. And he didn't want to tell him. He makes this statement. He said, "I wish it was anyone but you." Now, you got to put some context on this. Nebuchadnezzar had threatened Daniel and his friend's life numerous times. Nebuchadnezzar is the king whose army invaded Daniel's country and brought him as a prisoner of war back to Babylon and made him a slave. Every hard thing and every bad thing that had ever happened in Daniel's life was directly or indirectly because of this man. And when this dream comes, when Daniel is in that position where he understands the dream and the king is asking him what he means, Daniel's response is, "I wish it was anybody but you." Which just blows my mind. I mean, that encourages me on one hand because that's what humility looks like. It also challenges me on the other hand. Would I have that same kind of response? To the people that make your job hard every day for no reason. To the people in your neighborhood that have the signs in their yards that you can't stand. To the people that are posting on social media the things that are completely opposite of what you believe. Would you have that attitude? "Oh, I wish it was anybody but you. I wish this wasn't going to happen to you." Do you see the people in your life that make your life hard? Do you see them as opponents to overcome? Or do you see them as people to love and to pray for? For Daniel, his humility required him, even though this man had been the cause of every problem in his life, his humility required him to say, "I wish it was anybody but you." He continues in verse 27. Nebuchadnezzar didn't listen, but Daniel tried. Verse 27, he says, "Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be then that your prosperity will continue." In other words, Daniel said to him, "King, I hope it's not too late. Like I said earlier, God's given you a warning. So please stop. Stop what you're doing. Show kindness to people that are oppressed. Change your ways." So again, humility, when it's being confronted by pride, Daniel is willing to confront. Now, he does it with compassion. He does it with a genuine regard and no desire to take revenge. He's not like, "Well, king, guess you're going to get what you deserve. You've had this coming for a while, and so, too bad, right?" No. I wish it wasn't you. I don't want this to be true. There's still time if you will change. And again, it points, if you're a follower of Jesus, it points you, this is how we respond. To the people that make your life hard, to the people that disagree with you, that have a completely different look around morality, around the future, around what we as a people should be about. To those folks, I gotta ask you a question. How do you see them? You see, people that don't agree with you, if you treat them like enemies, why would they want to hear anything you have to say about who Jesus is if they've become your opponent? If you're going to treat them like an enemy, you're almost inviting them to reject the Jesus that's changed your life. Do you know what people who don't know Jesus live like? They live like people that don't know Jesus. And people who live like they don't know Jesus are not your enemy. They are victims of your enemy. You see, it really matters when you're humble, how you approach other people. And the question is, are we trying to win a culture war? Or are we trying to persuade people to follow Jesus? How do we treat them? Again, are they an opponent? Are they an enemy? Well, no. As a matter of fact, the Bible tells us that our enemy is not flesh and blood. And it tells us exactly how we should respond. We respond with kindness. We are able and ready to teach. We invite them into a different life. It doesn't mean we say nothing. It doesn't mean that we don't live out our faith. Of course we live out our faith. It's grace and truth. We show love and we share the truth. Just like Daniel, we compassionately confront. We let people know there is a better way. Please don't go this way. Please change. Please repent. Please follow Jesus. Your life could be so much better if you're willing to do this. But every time we make the decision to be bitter, to complain, to criticize, we begin to cast a die, and we begin to build a character in our hearts. And that heart then becomes a bitter place. And it becomes harder and harder to enjoy the good world that God has made. Because I'm so busy finding and focusing and pointing out the things that I don't like and that aren't going the way I want them to. And I'm seeing everybody that disagrees with me as an enemy to be conquered. And I got to tell you, because I've sat in that seat, and sometimes I still do, it's a constant fight. It's pride. It's absolutely pride. And as I've been saying, it slides me into places I don't want to be. It makes me into a person I don't want to be. And it creates circumstances that I don't know how to get out of. But there's another choice that you can make. You can choose humility. And I know so far we've been talking about this, and it's like, okay, don't be prideful, be humble. All right, good luck, I'll try that. Let me give you a couple of ideas about how to actually bring this to bear on your own life, okay? The first one is actually the same idea. You have to make a decision, but it's a different decision. It's not a decision to criticize, to complain, to point out failure. Instead, it's to make the daily decision to rejoice. To make the daily decision to rejoice. And here's what is the core of this. It is starting the day and throughout the day simply saying, God, look at what you've done. God, thank you. Thank you for the good things that are in my life. Honestly, if all I had was Jesus and the story of salvation, if I'm a follower of Jesus, that is enough. That is enough for me to have joy every day. But because of who he is, because of what he's like, he continually floods out and pours out and gives out of himself, out of his love for us every day, things that we can rejoice over. So instead of finding the things that we don't like, and this isn't the power of positive thinking, this is so much more powerful than that. This is instead saying, God, I believe that you are good. I believe that what you created is good, and I believe that you are good to me. And I am going to celebrate that because you are good to me every day. And what happens? What happens is, it starts out as a choice of the will. Because anybody can do it when things are going great, right? A couple good things happen. Thank you, God, for that. Thank you for this, whatever. But when things aren't going great, you still can make the choice. You can still rejoice in what God has done. And when you do, what happens is that choice starts to eventually become a character. It changes your nature. And you move from a person of bitterness to a person of joy. And one of the things, joy and humility go together great. Joy and pride are incompatible. So you don't attack pride by saying, I'm not going to be proud. You attack pride by opting for joy. Second thing you can do, it's very simple, it's to raise your eyes, to raise your eyes. You see, the thing that changed everything for Nebuchadnezzar, and I encourage you, read Daniel chapter 4. We were only able to look at some of it. There's so much there. But there's an incredible statement that Nebuchadnezzar makes. And everything changed for him. He said, when he raised his eyes to heaven, when he finally acknowledged who God was, that God was in control, that God was in charge, that it was his creation, it was his world, that God is the one that even gave him authority, that everything he had is because God gave it to him. When Nebuchadnezzar raised his eyes, his pride melted away. Because he was so sure that he was the stuff. And then when he saw who God was, he realized, nope, I'm not. It's him. It's him. And he is loving and good and generous, but it's him, not me. And it's no different for you. When you raise your eyes. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus, this is simply going back over the ground, much like we've done today, where we've celebrated the Lord's Supper, we've worshiped God, we've been thankful for what he's done, we treasure the salvation that we have in Christ, and we realize it's him, not me. But if you're not a follower of Jesus, you might hear this and you might be in one of those moments where your pride has kind of caused you to slide into places you don't want to be. And it's become painful. It's become difficult. And that pride has been hard to live with. Can I tell you something? God doesn't hate you. He's trying to wake you. God is not trying to pay you back. He is trying to bring you back. He is inviting you to come with humility, to raise your eyes, to look to him, to receive the salvation that he offers, to admit that I've messed it up. God, I thought I knew better, but I realize now that I don't. I want to follow you. It's an incredible step. It's huge. It changes everything. It changed everything for Nebuchadnezzar. It can change everything for you. For those of you that know him, you know this is who we are. You know this. It's not always easy to do. But this is the goal we're living towards. This is the life we want to live. We want to be the people that, you know what, even if my neighbors aren't for me, I'm for them. Even if the king is trying to take away my privileges, I'm for the king. Even if the community doesn't understand me and rejects my beliefs and everything else, I'm for the community. We are for other people because Jesus is for us. And that's what humility looks like. And when humility is in place, it is so easy to let go of the idea of revenge. I don't have to win. I don't have to get back. And I don't have to show them how they're wrong. Instead, I'm going to live in joy because of who God is and what he's done. I'm going to live in security because Christ has died for me and has reconciled me back to my Father. It changes everything. Let's pray together.